All right, and we're live. So, welcome to the Classy Liberal podcast. I'm your host, Classy Liberal. For those watching on Revenge of the Dreamers channel, well, you see my channel got a strike, so I'm going to be using his channel today to stream. I'll be uploading this episode on my channel later this week, and check out my channel if you want to see more episodes of the Classy Liberal podcast. So, that being said, how are you, Endeavour?
I'm not bad. How are you?
I'm fine. So, what made you want to start a YouTube channel?
Well, I think that just I didn't think the world was going in the right direction, and I wanted to chime in. I think that the West is clearly in decline these days, and I think that I really wanted to get my voice out there. I wanted to really get certain ideas out there, and I guess just see if what ways I could contribute, really, because if you don't do anything about the problem, well, you're part of the problem. So, hopefully just get my voice out there and hopefully influence someone.
Okay, and what do you think is wrong with Western civilization right now?
Well, I think that it's just in a very steep decline. I think that the West has lost a lot of its a lot of the stuff that's really made it great. It's lost its culture, its spirituality. Our countries have lost our sense of nationality, and I think that it's created a more a lot more of a nihilistic, a lot more of a materialistic world, and one that I think the conditions are being set for a future that will be very bad for the for European peoples and in the lands that we've created. And I think that I just think that over the coming years, I think that the West is in for dark days ahead, and I would like to hopefully give some insight into ways that I think that we could reverse the trend.
Sure. And just to clarify, to understand where people are coming from, I assume you're like some sort of traditional conservative or maybe even neo-reactionary?
Yeah, I would accurately describe myself as neo-reactionary. I'd say
Okay.
that I'm similar to the alt right, but I mean I don't call myself alt right. I'd say that there's a lot in common, and I'd say that I'm also similar to just the NRX types. So people like Nick Land, Mencius Moldbug, and I mean I'm mostly interested in culture and kind of just the way that the way that society works, really, and just like human nature, how that factors in, and then the idea of nationalism in the nation state, and kind of like reviving that idea.
Okay, so yeah, what it seems to me, I noticed that a lot of the neo-reactionary types and the alt-right people, you guys do have a lot of similar views, and I don't want to straw man you, but you are a race realist, right? Or
I'd say yes, I am.
okay,
I'm not an expert in it,
okay,
so I mean I can't answer I can't answer very specific questions in it. I'd say I believe in it. However, I'm not an expert in it. But my take on it is that a race is real in its effect. So whether or not it's sociological or biological, I find that it doesn't really matter because the effect of it is so real on society that you're not going to be able to negate that effect.
okay. So the biggest difference between the neo-reactionary types and the alt-right types is that you're more focused on religion and philosophy and culture and that sort of stuff.
Well, I'd say that I'd say that for me, like ethnicity definitely factors into it. I would call myself an ethno-nationalist, most likely. But I would also say that I am focused on a lot of other aspects of society. So I don't think I don't only focus on the race issue. I also focus on forms of government, religion, culture, and just I guess what the way that society functions. But I do think that ethnicity and the idea of ethno nationalism, I say, does factor into that a lot.
Okay, interesting. And are you like, let's see, cause I wanna now that I have a chance to talk to you, I can actually pick your brain and see where you come from. Are you like a monarchist or Republican?
I'd say that I do like the idea of monarchy. I don't know if I would call myself a monarchist in that I think that it's a realistic goal, because I don't think it is. I don't think that monarchy is like a realistic goal for any like your Western country in the near future. So, I mean, I don't list it as one of my goals. I think that the real key is uh, getting an idea of restoring a more stable, more aristocratic, I guess, more hierarchical form of government. And I think that one that's really just better than the than liberal democracy of today. So
Well,
I'd say that I entertain the idea of monarchy. I don't know if I consider it a realistic goal for me, though.
okay. Well, you're one of the real G's. So you guys, you go a little bit further than most Trump supporters. What did you say?
But yes, I would say I do.
Okay. So, do you have any criticisms of like conservatism in America, or because I know a lot of you guys have a little bit of how should I put this, disagreements with like mainstream conservatives.
Yeah, I have a lot of disagreements with them. I actually did a video response to Prager University, in which I critiqued a lot of the older kind of neoconservative views. I think that the critiques I have of them are that they don't really attack the underlying beliefs of the left, I find. And I find that they really kind of play into a lot of the same narratives. There's a lot of truths that they seem to be avoiding. And I think that really the neoconservative, and also another thing is war is like what's it called? Uh, Getting into unnecessary wars. That's another problem I have with them.
Intervention.
Yeah, interventionist. That's another problem I have with them. And yeah, I think just that they've kind of sold out culture and really kind of a lot of the things that I think the West is lacking. I find they've sold a lot of that out in exchange for neoliberal economic policy. And I find that they just haven't really been an effective movement in actually winning a culture war or pushing back
Okay.
against a lot of the things the left is doing.
But you don't think neoliberal economics has been beneficial to the country? I mean, we have, cheaper products, higher standards of living. Globalization has made it easier to trade with other countries. So we have how do you say, more variety as to, like, what products we can buy.
Yeah, but I think that the real problem is that people can't really afford that the lifestyle that they used to be able to, like a house, a family, and then all the things that they used to be able to afford on just a working class salary. They really can't afford that anymore, and it I think puts a real dent in a lot of the in a lot of just the way of life. And I also think that neoliberalism, it's very materialistic. It's very it really breeds consumerism, and I think that it's really a big part of the cultural decline in the West.
Okay, so what do you blame more for the West decline in your view? Is it neoliberalism or is it the left?
Well, I think that it's kind of difficult to say because I think it's a variety of factors. I'd say that one of the major ones is the West just that it really lost belief in its own civilization, and that I find that like a Western man really doesn't have this belief that he's like that he built the greatest civilization on Earth, and that he really earned his spot in the world. I kind of find that he's really lost that sense, and I think that was lost after the two world wars. I think that, and then I think another huge factor of that is, of course, critical theory and the kind of the ideology of the left, and in that it really kind of deconstructed a lot of the West's a lot of Western society, and it really over the last century has lost. It's lost its religion. People aren't really religious anymore. They've lost. People have lost their sense of community. They've lost their sense of nationhood. They've lost, and they're really the idea that they're part of this great society. I think it's a variety of factors. I think that definitely the ideology of kind of the ideology of progressivism, the kind of the oppressor-oppressed narrative as applied to things like race, gender. That's been a big factor to the decline. And then, of course, like mass immigration. I think that definitely factors into it. And
Okay.
okay, go ahead.
No, sorry, you can finish.
Yeah, so I'd say that's probably the biggest factor in the decline. Really, just the West's loss of its self-confidence.
Okay, but you don't think that there's a place for the left in the Western civilization? You don't think it's good to have like some level of skepticism against nation, culture, and tradition? I mean, I hope you can see that maybe not every single aspect of tradition and of culture is true. Like maybe you might have some criticisms of tradition and culture and how we used to do things.
Well, here's what I think. I think that there is room for disagreement in societies. I think that if you had like a right who was for more economic freedom, more capitalistic, and there was a left that was more socialistic. I mean, I think that that's kind of a disagreement that societies that would be good for society. But I think that the problem is the deconstruction of really society's core. So the loss of the idea that that a nation is built for a people, really, in that and I think that kind of this subversive ideology of like tearing down really the fabric of society. That's one that I really don't think that is very healthy for society, because there are certain foundations that you need to preserve, and once you lose those, you can't really get them back. Like, for example, I think one of those is just the idea of the idea of nationhood, in that and that the nation should be formed by really a core identity, a core ethnicity, and that's really the fabric. I think that's kind of been like torn apart, in that it's often associated with fascism these days. And the problem with that is that you really now have a situation where you're having mass immigration into the West, but at the same time, you're creating this kind of class conflict between these different classes that have been like inserted into Western civilization. And that so I mean, for example, you'll now have a bunch large Islamic populations in the West that according to, now that we've really kind of lost our sense of nationhood, it kind of sees them as like just as big of a part of Europe as Europeans are, whereas on the flip side, Europeans aren't welcome in their society. So I mean, I'm against the idea of extending nationhood to pretty much anyone on Earth. I think that's just one of the major flaws that we have right now.
But you don't think that the whole concept of nations could be arbitrary? I mean, I can name many nations that existed in Europe and Asia that are gone. I mean, Prussia is gone. Ancient Rome is gone. The Byzantine Empire is gone. What is culture? Isn't culture just a collection of new ideas, new customs?
Well, those nations are gone, but I don't think that means we want ours to be gone. I mean, I don't want Canada to be gone. I don't want. That's where I live, by the way. I don't want Britain to be gone. I don't want France to be gone. I mean, if they get invaded and taken over, well, I mean, we can't really do anything about that. But the thing is that it's being kind of self-imposed upon us, and I think we have the right to fight back and to prevent it from happening. So, yeah, nations do disappear, but that doesn't mean you should let your own disappear.
Okay, but when has a nation ever disappeared because of immigration policies?
Well, they've disappeared because of demographic shifts, like Prussia being kicked out of, like the Germans being kicked out of East Prussia, or actually another example, the Arabs invading North Africa, because those were the Arabs are not indigenous to North Africa. For example, like the Coptic Christians in Egypt, they've been essentially like they've been overwhelmed by the Arab population which moved in. And now they really are just like this hated minority in this country where they're persecuted. And I mean, that's just the situation you don't want to have. And kind of going back is I'm of the belief that nationality is really something that it's more than just a stamp on a passport. It's something that really has to be inherited. And if you replace huge chunks of your society with immigrants from another society, you really lose those chunks of your you lose those chunks of your nation.
Okay. So, okay, you might be able to make a case for ethno-nationalism in Europe. Countries have been historically what some people would consider European. But what about countries like the United States or maybe even Canada, but more United States because that's the country I'm familiar with, where civic nationalism is sort of, ingrained in our culture, the idea of a melting pot that no matter what race we are, we're all Americans.
Well, I
Um,
would. Oh, yeah, go ahead.
no, just you can answer.
But I mean, do you think that's working right now, though?
I mean, I'm kind of an example of that. I'm Hispanic descendant, and I think I've integrated well into American society.
Yeah, but would you still say that you identify with being Hispanic, though?
I mean, I'm more American to be honest. I mean, listen to my accent. My Spanish has an American accent. Um, that's just sort of the culture I'm more familiar with. I'm not saying like I don't deny my Latino side, but it's just United States was the place where I was born and raised, and ideas such as individualism, liberal democracy, those sort of things. I care more about that than what is Latino culture.
Well, I don't really think that kind of liberalism is a strong enough foundation to build a society, because the situation we really are looking at in the U.S. right now is that it seems to be really falling apart. And actually, historically, the U.S. was really meant to be a European nation. I mean, that's the policies that they had for their first 200 years. And I think that since then, it's largely falling apart. And really, the sense of unity, I don't really think it's very much there. I mean, because I don't see it in. I just don't see it with the rhetoric that's in the media right now, with the elections and all this stuff. I really don't see this unity really lasting very long.
But what about a lot of how, the Trump people? I'd say the overwhelming majority of them are, very much civic nationalists, and there are plenty of like African Americans
Well,
and,
not really.
Trump supporters. What?
Well, not really. 90% of the people that voted Republican were white.
Sure, sure. But you don't think like that the fact like a lot of Trump supporters like to point out that this election more African Americans voted for Trump than they did for the Republican candidate in previous elections.
I would say that's kind of cherry picking, because still 88% of them voted for Hillary. So I think that the reason that it was less is because it was Obama the previous election, and they kind of just identified with him more. But I think that I mean, you can really see that these voting blocks and this divide in America, it really seems to be it really doesn't seem like this civic nationalism is really going to work out long term. I mean, I don't see it working out long term because of just the narratives that are in place and just the way that it's playing out.
Sure, but what about the idea that many years ago we weren't even welcoming to European immigrants, so we didn't like the Italians or the Irish, and now they're considered just as an American as anyone, as German descent or English descent.
Well, I think that I think that people have a right to deny access to their country if they'd like to, because I mean, a lot of these immigration policies in the West, they weren't with the consent of the populations that inherited the lands, and I think that I think that a lot of them would be against these would have been against it, dead against it, if they had known what the results would have been. So I think I just don't see that. I just don't see right now how the United States is becoming a more unified society and not a less unified one. With there being like fights in the street between Antifa and the Trump supporters and all this stuff. I mean, it seems like the idea of liberalism and the idea of the civic nationalism, it seems to be falling apart.
But like, there's always going to be conflict. I mean, that's sort of the trade-off you make with democracy.
Well, I mean, I have a lot of problems with the idea of democracy itself, but I mean, the point is though that you in these nations, people end up really losing a lot of their culture through immigration because culture and ethnicity are very intertwined. I mean, that's something you can't really separate very often. And in Europe and in America, I think that you can really see a loss of a lot of culture and a loss of a lot of community through immigration, because what you'll look at is a lot of these neighborhoods, they end up just being entirely Spanish speaking, or in Europe you'll see entire Islamic no-go zones. And I mean, the idea of the integration, it just doesn't seem to be happening, especially not with the levels of immigration. I mean, with the levels that it's at, there's really no reason to integrate, because you can have your host culture there. So why would you integrate into the dominant culture?
Okay. I mean, definitely, yeah, there could be some issue with recent, immigrants assimilating, but you don't think that the children of these immigrants will be able to assimilate? I mean, I live in a very much a Spanish, Hispanic sort of area, though, and I went to an all Hispanic school, and everyone spoke English, except for the tiny minority of recent immigrants.
Yeah, but at the same time, if you look at the breakdown of the voting breakdown, I mean, if it seems like that's developing is that the Democrats really seem to be running on the idea of bringing more and more immigrants into the United States and using them as a voter bloc. It doesn't really seem like there's much integration, because when you just look at the rhetoric right now, it seems to be a lot of fuck America, we want and really appealing to the identity politics from the groups that they're bring in. And I mean, I just ask you though, do you think that it's positive for the white American population or negative?
I mean, I guess it kind of depends on who you ask, but I'll say generally speaking is positive. I mean, you have more business opportunities. You have, more opportunities overseas.
Oh, how? How do you have more opportunities?
Oh, because, they can bring in their culture. Like how do I put this though? So whatever, let's say that there's a white American businessman and he meets a Mexican businessman and they become good friends. And now let's say Mexican businessman has his business, his family's business in Mexico. And who knows, his relationship with the white American businessman could, be beneficial to both of them. That maybe, I don't know, he can have some sort of deal with you need this product. My family, my brother back in Mexico can get you this product. And because
why do you need the Mexicans to live in your country for that?
It just makes it easier. I mean, they come here to the country, they can learn the language easier.
But I mean, how exactly do the white Americans benefit from this immigration, though?
I mean, how do the white Americans? Well, I mean, this is, I guess, more from a purely economic point of view, but now a lot of American businessmen have a new source of labor, though. They have a population that is willing to work for cheaper, so they save money in terms of labor cost.
But I mean, do you think that for an average working class guy in, say, Michigan or Ohio or Pennsylvania, do you think that really helps him out? Do you think that he probably doesn't want that?
I mean, it may hurt him.
Wouldn't that make his wages go down?
Yeah, but there's nothing stopping from him creating his own business, or there's nothing stopping him from immigrating to another country.
Well, why should he have to leave his country, though?
Or he could also work for less.
Well,
can
why would he want to work for less though? I mean, that's certainly a negative for him, isn't
Why
it?
would anyone want to work for less though? If you have like two people who maybe they're the same race, but one is willing to work for less, like this happens all the time. Like, people
But
negotiate
you
wage.
can understand why he'd want them not to enter the country. Then don't you? I mean, if you want another example, it's things like affirmative action, because what a
Okay.
lot of the policies in place is that they'll give special grants to minority-owned businesses. So they'll give special grants to Mexican or African American-owned businesses. Well, that's another opportunity that's lost because he can't now. Now with affirmative action, they have to give those opportunities to other groups first. I mean, that's another reason you probably wouldn't want another economic reason you probably wouldn't want it, wouldn't you?
I mean, fair enough. I'm against affirmative action though, but one of the problems that a lot of people from the conservative side tend to argue is that a lot of immigrants, or at least immigrant population in the United States, that they tend to be higher in crime, and if they have more business opportunities, more job opportunities, and they can make more money. And I think that there is a link between income and crime. So if they're more prosperous, then the white American doesn't have to worry, has to less worry about crime.
But again, though, that's it's a zero-sum game here. There's only a certain amount of opportunity, and if you're losing that opportunity yourself, then you're losing out on your job opportunities, aren't you?
But you don't think that the capitalist system like needs immigrants in order to sustain itself? Like,
Not the amount that it's taking in. I don't. No.
okay. I mean, I'm not saying that I'm for mass immigration. I'm for immigration, and I would like to see maybe something done so we can reduce the illegal immigration. But I don't see why that sort of justifies this any sort of ban on legal immigration
Well, I
from.
mean, another thing though is cultural, because I mean, you said you lived in a Hispanic area, Hispanic school.
Yeah.
That's probably like your. I mean, you'd probably feel a lot more at home in that one, wouldn't you?
Not necessarily, but look, I can argue and make the case that like immigration here where I live has made. I'll just say the state I live, Florida, has made Florida very prosperous. Like many years ago, we were poor. We had very little job opportunities. And now we're full with tourists. We're filled with new businesses. We're filled with all sorts of variety of how do you say, how do I put stuff, like things to do here. Many years ago it was just like a poor little town, and now it's a vibrant community.
Not really. Florida has always been a pretty vibrant place, hasn't it?
Well, at least not. Well, it depends on where you're.
It's been pretty prosperous for decades now, for quite a while, hasn't it?
Well, I need the data on this though. This is more from sort of personal experience from like immigrants who've told me their stories when they first got here back in the 80s, and they say that like South Florida was very much, it had like a lot of poverty, and a lot of areas were very like run down. Now like the infrastructure has improved, and there's a lot more job opportunities. But I know there's a study of the Cuban immigrants that came from in the ship. I think it was called the Marriott, and they actually found that like it didn't have any significant change in terms of like lowering the wages in low income native areas, and in fact there was a lot of economic benefits.
Okay, there's also the issue of culture though, because what really happens though in these white neighborhoods is that when what will happen with them is they get a huge influx of immigrants, then the white population ends up leaving because they don't really feel as at home anymore when they're kind of being when they're really kind of starting to lose their community, and then even sometimes it'll have an increase in crime and an increase in unemployment and a lot of other problems. I mean, you can look they may not admit it, but they end up leaving these towns like Chicago, Detroit, St. Louis. I mean, you see that happen quite often in these cities, So, I mean, you would understand why white Americans might want to have like a kind of a space of their own that can't
They
really
kind
be.
of already do. I mean, we have states that are almost 90% white. We have many neighborhoods that are almost exclusively white. You know, like
Would it be wrong for them to want to keep it that way?
I mean, people have freedom of association, so
Well, not really. They can't keep people out of. They can't really choose who's in their community and who isn't.
okay, but we can't really base our policies on what people feel is good or what or culture. You know, we can't really just base policies on what they feel is you know, like, how do I put this up? We can't make our policies based on feelings. Is my point though. And if you're
Well,
making this
I mean,
culture,
the culture is something that's very important to people. It's the ability to actually form communities.
but it's arbitrary. You can't. What is culture now is vastly different of what culture was hundreds of years ago.
But yeah, you can't really develop those, and you can't really pass those on and really develop that without community. And one thing we really do see in a lot of these is homogenous communities seem to be the most cohesive ones. So, I mean, what I'm saying is, you can from that standpoint, you'd understand why they would not want that amount of immigration. Like, for example, Tucker Carlson had a episode where he talked about a town that had gone from being like 90% white to being 90% Hispanic within the course of 20 years. I mean, you know, you could understand why the people that lived there wouldn't have wanted that to happen. Do you?
Okay. But you can also make the argument that's happening the reverse side with gentrification, that many white people are moving into poor neighborhoods, and it's making property value go up, so it's making it more expensive for whether it be Hispanic or Black Americans, and they're being forced to move out those areas. So,
well, I would be willing to make compromise in that, in saying that certain areas they can keep their areas if the white Americans or white Canadians could keep their own. But I mean, I'd be okay with that kind of compromise.
okay, so you'll be okay with I don't know, let's say Miami Beach remaining Jewish and Harlem remaining African American.
I mean, I don't have a problem with it. I mean, if they don't want me in their neighborhood, they don't have to.
Okay, but I mean, I'm not really sure what's my view on gentrification, to be honest, because I think there's some advantage of it too, because it does actually lower crime as well. It does bring economic.
I can understand why they're against it. I mean, because I mean, it's for the same reason. I mean, they don't want to lose their communities, and I can understand why they'd be against it. I think I'd be fine with extending the same kind of rights to build your own communities, build your own like little neighborhoods. I'd be okay with extending that same right. It's just if it's applied to everyone, though.
Okay, I have a question.
Yeah,
Do you think segregation is good? Like, segregating communities is good for race relations? Because if they're always in the same community with the same people, aren't they more likely to develop, prejudice attitudes towards our other communities?
Well, I'd say that not really. Because I think that what usually happens is that usually is what happens naturally. Like, if you look at cities like Chicago, Detroit, Philadelphia, that's kind of what naturally happens. And at the same time, I think that one of the real causes of ethnic conflict is often when people that don't get along with each other are forced together. That's what I think being one of the biggest problems is when you get two communities that don't like each other and they're forced to live together. I think that's a lot. I think that would be a lot worse for race relations, and that I think that just kind of allowing for there being good fences making good neighbors. I think would be a better approach to that.
Okay. All right, that's fine. Well, okay. Let's move to another topic.
Sure.
I think your last video was on Antifa, right?
Yes, it was.
So Antifa, they're like an anarcho-communist group, and not really all that friendly. Yeah. So what's wrong with Antifa, man? You don't want to fight fascism? You don't hate Nazis?
Well, I mean, the video, the point of the video is that Antifa, what they're really doing is they're just enforcing the mainstream progressive left, and they're really just enforcing the culture that be, and that because the culture is really this it's this one kind of based on this critical theory dichotomy of the oppressor and the oppressed. You know, the white people are the oppressors, the non-whites are the oppressed, the men are oppressors, women are oppressed. It's kind of like this narrative, and that is the narrative that seems to be like permeating all of society. It seems to be just echoing in our culture, and then it's being imposed through policies, through like things like affirmative action, mass immigration, and stuff like that. I think it seems like this idea is just like this kind of anti-Western, anti-European idea is the one that's permeating society. And the argument I made was that Antifa aren't really revolutionaries or anything. They're really just kind of the useful idiots of the establishment. They're just the useful idiots of the people that want mass immigration and, you know, multiculturalism and like the tearing down of Western society. Antifa are just the ones that are doing their bidding rather than actually being revolutionaries at all.
Okay, but like you don't think like there's a sort of animosity between Antifa and the establishment progressives and mainstream
No,
liberals?
I don't think there is, because I think that they're
But what about
defending
the whole liberals get the bullet too?
But when they say that, they're not referring to, you know, the mainstream establishment. They're saying like people like the anti-SJWs, because the thing is, like, anyone that goes against the anti-European narrative, the anti-Western narrative, anyone that goes against that is a fascist according to Antifa. So if you don't hate white people, if you don't believe in the patriarchy, if you don't think that multiculturalism is amazing, then you're a fascist according to them. So Antifa, I'd say they're really just doing the bidding of the establishment progressive left. They're not really who are the ones in charge right now. So I don't think the Antifa really is at all dissidents. They're just conformists, really.
Okay, no, that's really interesting because they like to sort of like how do I put this? Advertise themselves as like the nonconformists, as we're breaking a traditional gender of roles, that sort of stuff. We're the ones that are revolting against the capitalist system, the mainstream. But you would say that they're just another tool, the useful idiot.
Yeah, they're the useful idiots of the mainstream left, because all the ideas that they're going on. I mean, these are the ideas that are preached in the academies. They're the ideas that are very much in policy in many countries, and they're really just enforcing that. Like, if they were revolutionaries, then why are they against freedom of speech? If they're revolutionary, they should be in favor of free speech, but they're much more interested in shutting down speech. And the speech of the people that they're shutting down are not the people in power. It's the people that are dissidents, like, I guess, like myself, like people on the dissident right. That's their real target. And they're really just kind of trying to reinforce what the mainstream media is already saying. And that's why the mainstream media loves them so much.
But does the mainstream media really love them? Like, I can probably find a few articles online from certain mainstream media outlets that are actually a little bit critical of Antifa and actually talk about the violence. And, there's also the fact that Antifa is actually listed as a domestic terrorist group by Homeland Security. So I don't really think that they're all that popular, really, though.
But we have to look at their effect, though. Their effect is shutting down dissident right-wing speech. So, I mean, they're not. The point is that they're not like a threat to bring about communism or anything like that. They're a threat to prevent other ideas from entering the arena.
I agree with that, but like, you don't think like that's a little bit exaggerated, because it really is just a fringe group of anarchists, though. Like,
yeah, I don't think they're a threat at all. I just think that they're just
useful idiots.
Useful idiots, really. They're just college students,
Okay, fair enough. Okay, then. Okay, here's the thing I might disagree with you. Religion. So you think that religion is very important to society, right?
Yeah, I think it had a very positive effect.
And do you think that like society is becoming like more secular or more religious?
Well, one thing that we have this kind of funny effect is that it seems like religion seems to be atheism seems to be having a small uptick in the population, but over the long term, it's going to be a huge decline, because what's really happening in Europe and in America is that there's a couple more people are becoming atheists, but the ones that become atheists aren't having children, and the ones that are religious are having children, and then the religious communities are growing. Like one thing you can see is in the United States amongst people who are conservative, people who are traditionalist, their birth rate is about 0.6%, 0.6 points higher than people who are very liberal and very secular. So, I mean, I don't know. It's kind of a weird trend that it's on. It's on a slightly on an increase, but at the same time, over the long term, it's on a decrease.
But you don't think that like secularism and that sort of stuff is part of European culture? I mean, what was the whole Age of Enlightenment? It was a sort of revolt against the sort of mainstream Christianity, and many secular philosophers came from that era.
Well, Western civilization was a Christian civilization from the day of Constantine all the way until just a few decades ago, when people started losing their faith. And to say that it became secular after the Enlightenment, I think is wrong, because for the next hundreds of years, the next 200 years, it remained a deeply religious society. So I don't think that necessarily atheism is, or even secularism per se, is entirely is synonymous with the West. I'd say, on the contrary, religion is a lot more synonymous with the West.
Well, what about the fact that some of the most influential thinkers of the West in history were very anti-Christian or skeptical of religion, at the very least? Like people like Thomas Paine, one of the founders of the United States, hated Christianity. I think it was either John Adams or Thomas Jefferson who wrote a version of the Bible that was like without all the what they call the mystical parts of it. And in fact, that like so much of our philosophy is, at least in Britain and maybe even America a little bit, is influenced by secular philosophers. I mean, many economists were very secular. People like Ludwig von Mises or Murray Rothbard.
But I mean, you have to understand, though, that the society as a whole was a very religious one for hundreds and hundreds of years. So I mean, and I'd say that a lot of the ideas of a lot of secular ideas, I think have had a very, very negative effect. I think that the West's loss of its spirituality I think that was a major loss in Western culture, because when you look at what religion played, the role that it played in America and in Europe, it was a way of bringing people together. It was a way of instilling a sense of morality in them, and a sense of community, and just a higher purpose. And I think that without that, I mean, it just seems that life is a lot more nihilistic.
Okay, but what about the people who would argue that religion has had a negative impact in society, as religion has sort of, has been an obstacle for scientific exploration, or that religion has oppressed many groups like, homosexuals or women?
What you need to do is, you have to actually compare a religious society to a non-religious society, because you can't say that that religion was bad if you have nothing to compare it to. So, and I mean, Western civilization, as I've said,
secular societies today are very prosperous. Countries like Japan, Norway, Sweden, Switzerland.
But again, though, the civilization that developed them was Christian, and I believe that these ones are in decline now, though. So they
have lower crime, they have economic prosperity,
but they developed as Christian societies for hundreds and hundreds of years. I mean, they didn't just pop out of nowhere within the last 50 years. Norway, Sweden, these were already developed countries well before the last, well before World War II. And I mean, if you look at them today, ones like Sweden, with Islamic immigration and feminism and all this crap that's going on there, it looks like Sweden's one that's in decline rather than one that's on the ascent.
Okay, but what about the fact that like religion hasn't have a positive impact in countries in Africa or countries in Latin America, and these countries are arguably even more Christian and more religious than than most of the countries in Europe.
Well, I think that one argument you could get into there is one argument you could make is race realism. Another one though
Of course.
is, but another one though is it's just that religion wasn't the only aspect, of course, to the development of these societies, but they developed. Again, you have to understand that civilizations developed over thousands and thousands of years, and you can't just you can't just like take things in a vacuum. You can't just say, well, this country is secular today, this one is not. Therefore, this one's better. You have to look at like what built that civilization. And I will say that in response to another thing is I don't think that religion really did oppress people because I think that Christianity. I just think it got people. I think that it provided a healthy lifestyle for Western civilization for thousands of years. I don't think that because what you have to look at is what's the alternative. Because you see, the problem that a lot of people make is that they assume that if you just get rid of something, well, then the default is perfection. I mean, that's not really the case because
You have can replace it with secular philosophy.
Yeah, but the thing is though, what is the secular philosophy? What like will it? You don't know that.
I'm just joking.
Well, yeah, but yeah, that's like an example of something that you replace it with. But you actually have to replace it with something. You can't just say that something's bad without actually having something to replace it with.
I actually do agree with you there. And I am a secularist and I am an atheist, and I actually think that that's actually a really good criticism of the skeptic or secular community. As like I think that they're very good when it comes to like pointing out flaws, when it comes to like a lot of dogmatic ideas, but then they don't advocate for anything to replace those ideas, and I think we do need.
Yeah, like one joke I often say about the skeptics and like people like Richard Dawkins. What I say is that they told us that when we got rid of religion, we'd get the cure to cancer. Well, we don't have the cure to cancer, but we do have transgender children now. So.
Okay, but like, do you really think like everyone was fine when religiosity was king, though? I mean,
I don't think everyone was fine, but I think that I think overall it had a good they had a good lifestyle.
I mean, why do you think the Catholic Church has such a big problem with pedophilia and stuff like that, despite the fact that they're very for tradition and that sort of stuff?
Well, I think that's just I just think that's one of the vices that has kind of corrupted them. I mean, I'm actually not Catholic. I'm actually Baptist. Okay. But I think that, it certainly is a stain on their reputation. But at the same time, I don't think that you necessarily can throw out all the good that the Catholic Church has done, because, I mean, it's pretty ahistorical to say that they were anti-science, because if you actually look at monasticism and the amount of work that monks had to put in to actually preserve knowledge, I mean, these guys weren't dum-dums. I mean, they had to work their entire lives to translate texts from a dead language into another language, and they didn't have Google Translate back then.
To play devil's advocate, I'm actually studying genetics right now, and one of the most influential people in genetics, in the field of genetics, was Mendel. And Mendel, he wasn't even a scientist. He was just someone who really liked the scientific method and was into studying plants and how genetics was inherited. And of course, he was a very religious person. I believe he was a priest or a monk. I could be wrong. And again, he wasn't even a scientist with a PhD in anything. But if it weren't for his discoveries and his experiments, the field of genetics, I don't know. He just had a very important, influential role. But what about the fact that religiosity did sort of stump scientific advancements, such as Charles Darwin tried to put out his theory of evolution, and that took a very long time to get passed.
I mean, yeah, there is arguments against it, but however, if you actually look at it as a whole, it was Christianity was a lot more positive for scientific development, in that they were very much focused on knowledge, and that there was a lot of work dedicated to knowledge. I mean, like the universities. All these universities, these were Christian institutions. They were really meant that's what they were built for back in the Middle Ages. And yeah, because like you can't like just take one example and then say, well, they were anti-religious because of this. You actually have to look at the entire over its history. And another thing that, you know, a mistake that a lot of people make is if you look at the scientific revolution, these guys were all Christian. Like Isaac Newton, for example.
They were Christian because they didn't really have a choice. I mean,
but I mean, though, because they were in a Christian society, though. But the thing is, this was a Christian civilization, and why did this scientific revolution happen in this one and not, say, Islam? I don't know, China or Africa or something like that.
China made a lot of scientific discoveries. I mean, they discovered silk, they discovered gunpowder.
Yeah, I don't deny that. But what I'm saying though is that you can't like say Christianity was anti-science when there was all these great scientific achievements that were created in Christian society. Like, for example, Isaac Newton, he wrote more about theology than he wrote about physics. Or
but when he wrote all those things about theology, we never used those discoveries about theology. Turns out that
the point is though that the idea that religion was prevents people from thinking scientifically, it's quite false, I would say.
All right. So okay, let's move on to another topic.
Sure.
Do you have any criticisms of the alt-right?
I have a few. I'd say that I'm probably about 80% similar to them. I'd say one of my criticisms of them is they kind of make nationalism a bit too materialist. In that, I mean, this is why I don't really like to refer to myself as a white nationalist, because you see, I think that ethnicity does play. I think that kind of really is the basis of nationhood. Yes, but I think there is more to it than that. So, I mean, it's not that the fact that someone was white that made them British, but the people who were British were white. But I mean, there's more to it than that. Like, I think that kind of I guess you could say like some of the foundations of British society were Protestant Christianity, and just like the drive for excellence, capitalism, and there's a lot more to it. And then like, you know, there's and then there's just like the smaller cultural things, you know, the towns, the architecture, the art. There's a lot to it. And I think that's a mistake a lot of people in the alt-right make. That they, I mean, I do agree with them that that kind of culture and nationality are ethnic, but I don't agree with them that it's only about race and not about other things too. But I think that that's a part of it. And I'd say my other disagreement with them might be, I think a lot of their ideas are not very well thought out. Like, for example, I don't really use the phrase ethno-state because I think that it's, people get the wrong idea when they say ethno-state. They think that like they get the idea of like, you know, like trucks and camps and stuff like this and like really awful ideas. I like to say self-determination in that like I know that like you're not going to be able to make a 100% white state or anything like that. And I don't think that that's really necessary. I think that what's necessary though is that European peoples have their own nations. They make decisions for themselves. They're able to form their own communities, form their own culture, and really just like preserve the land for themselves. And I mean, it doesn't need to be 100%. It just, but I mean, that's really the key. And you know, I'm probably gonna make a series of videos eventually on, like on ways on certain things that I think would achieve this. So yeah, I for example, what I tend to think of it as is, say, Israel for the Jews. Like Israel is like only about 70% Jewish, but they very much are in control of that society. I mean, that's kind of
support open borders for Israel.
Well, I think that if they can have their own state as long as they don't deny us the right to have ours. That's what I say. So I mean that's kind of the way I think about it. I think my biggest complaints with the alt-right are they kind of just conceive of a few things incorrectly, and then I would also disagree with some of their actions. I think that they've I think that certain figures have done bad things that haven't really been helpful. So I'd say that there's a large overlap, but I'm not 100% alt-right. I mean, if someone calls me alt-right, I don't really care. But I mean, it's kind of a yeah. I mean, it's kind of I'm definitely an ally to them though.
Oh, okay. I was actually gonna ask you something like that.
Yeah, go ahead.
If you want, we can end it soon.
Yeah. I mean, whenever. Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, unless you have like anything to clarify.
No. I mean, if you have any more questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Oh, okay. Let's see. Well, okay. Then we could just end it here. If anything, we could just continue this conversation another time. But I will say this: if you guys want to check out Endeavor's channel, it should be linked in the description below. Endeavour, do you have anything to say to the skeptic, sort of anti-SJW community?
Well, yeah, actually, I think that a lot of them really need to look at their situation that they're in. They need to stop attacking the people that are stop attacking people that are actually trying to make change in the same way as them. I think that they really need to ask themselves, what side do they fall on? Because if you look at the rhetoric in the media, if you look at the universities, and if you look at the way that things are going, I mean, the progressive left, they have control over these universities. They have control over the media and the rhetoric that they're putting out. If you're against that, you should be allies with the people that are against it too. I think that's one of my things with them, is that you got to stop counter signaling a lot of people that are on your side. And I'd say that, you need to also, I think that a lot of anti-SJWs should also look at their underlying beliefs, because really what the anti-SJW, the SJW with it's really an ideology based on egalitarianism. It's an ideology based on the blank slate. And that's really what they're trying to, and that's really what the SJW's actions are. It's they believe that all humans in nature are equal, and that the only reason for inequality is because of oppression in our societies. And I think that if you actually want to oppose those, you have to actually look at your own underlying beliefs. And if you kind of believe in the same things, well, you're not going to be able to oppose that, because at the end of the day, it all ends up in the same place. So I'd say for them, you start entertaining more ideas, start being a bit more bold, and really start to question which side at the end of the day do you think will be better for you. And yeah, I'd like to talk to them a lot more. I mean,
okay, so you're open to talking to anti-SJWs and
sure
more
thing.
Progressive types?
I'm happy to talk to them. It's just that I think that a lot of them I have a lot of common ground with, and I think a lot of them we on kind of the dissident right, I think we could come to a lot of agreements with them. I think we should put a lot of our differences aside, because we really have the same enemies, I think. And I like having conversations like this. Like, thanks for having me on, man. I think it's best to I guess it's just best to iron things out and hopefully come to some kind of consensus with people that more or less will agree with you on a lot of things.
All right, so that's been Endeavour, everyone. Thanks for coming on my show, man. I really appreciate it. You can check out his channel in the link in the description below. If you're watching on the Revenge of the Dreamers channel, you can also check out my channel, and there's more episodes like this with other guests. So yeah, until then, stay classy.